Alright, I think we are good. I got a new stand for the drawing of the things with the lights, and I'm really excited about it. It's taking me a little bit of work to figure out how to get everything oriented the way we want it, but there's a lamp on it and a camera holder, and it is so much better than the MacGyver setup I had going on before. So I think we are winning. Morning to everyone. I am here, and it is a kind of overcast, lovely, calm, quiet day where I am. I hope it's as calm and restful for you. Working on a river map today. That's the last map that's going up for my Patreon for the month of August. So the intention for this map is to create something that's actually playable for a tabletop RPG. The goal is to have a river that's going through this section of the map and to have scattered palms and other foliage underneath it, around it, sorry, to create obstacles and barriers for characters to have to negotiate while they're encountering something. So yeah, right now I'm working on the palms that are hanging out in this area, so let me just pick a pen and we will get started. I had my 03 somewhere. Where did it go? Alright, well, I guess we're working in 01, because that's the option. Over here? Over here. Perfect. What happens if I move this up a little? Try and make it so that I'm not blocking what you guys are seeing with my hand while I'm working. Is that a little bit better? I think that's a little bit better. Maybe, maybe not. Let me know. Let's see what I can do to arrange things. The lamp and camera holder is really cool. They're connected though, so I don't have as many options for adjusting things as would be ideal perhaps, but it's so much better than the setup I've been using for the last few live streams, so definitely no complaining over here. Oh, it occurs to me to let you know that I'm working on an 11 by 17 piece of paper, so if you see me draw my pen off the side of the page and you can't quite figure out what's going on, that's what's happening. I'm just trying to make sure I keep everything consistent across the map. It's kind of funny to actually be able to say that and mean it. So there's a possibility that this map, once it's done, is going to get used for our ongoing D&D campaign, which is part of the reason why I kind of want to get it taken care of. We're in an area where there's a lot of rivers, and the game that we're playing is heavily exploration based and first contact kind of situations. So we have been on a ship, sailing, fleeing our homeland. There's a religious war going on back where we're from. And we just found land yesterday for the first time after being on ship for a little over 3 months. So food supplies were running pretty low. We were starting to have problems with religious conversions in the wake of the Zaratan sighting that had happened. There was a lot of tension on the ship between the people who thought that this giant turtle island thing was a new god and other people that were like, we just don't even want to think about it because we've never seen magic before and this is kind of messing with us. We had our first character death in the previous game. Nicole's character, Rosa, one of the ones who was very adamant that this turtle thing that we saw was a god, was trying to find things to sacrifice to it to gain its favor, and went after a couple of the ratters on the ship. And like, keep in mind, we're all level 1, and ended up getting taken down by a bunch of house cats. and then her badger backpack when it reanimated. So she wasn't there for us to make land with yesterday. That was a new character that Nicole is playing named Makosh. And Makosh is the best at everything, just everything. So it's kind of a fun character to watch Nicole roleplay. So we made landfall and we're on a sandy beach, kind of starting to check things out, and we get encountered by, we don't know what it is as characters. As a player, it's a Yuan-ti, which is perhaps not the most auspicious way to start things, who attack us and take us back to their lair because apparently we're more important alive. We have no idea why because we don't speak the language. So that encounter was us trying to figure out how to get free. What do we do about this situation when you're level 1 and you have no kit and no gear? And I got to be super badass last night. I critted on a face punch for one of the captors, so had kind of a Bruce Lee moment there, which was pretty amazing. And then yeah, so I've been creating more three-dimensional terrain for the game because we're doing a lot of that this time around, which is a lot of fun. It's been a blast. And then Dave asked if I would get a couple more maps together because there's going to be times when the map will be easier to play on than what the 3D terrain will, which makes sense to me. And I am playing my cartographer, Deer, more than my gardener, Jacoby, so far for this campaign. So it makes sense that the characters would have other maps as well for kind of guiding them around and seeing where they go. So yeah, once this one's done, I'm planning on coloring it. Probably with Copic, I'm thinking, which I think will add to it quite a bit. And then hopefully we'll be able to see it on the table at some point. That'd be nice. I'm not in a super talkative mood today. I'm not sure if I should apologize for that or not. But yeah, I feel like I'm probably going to end up talking about game a fair amount on these because they happened the night before. And somehow they're almost always related to what I'm doing. Although I was contacted just recently by a game designer who wanted to know if I'd be willing to contribute illustrations to their RPG project. And I'm super excited about this. I think it's going to be great. It's specifically a module that's designed to introduce families and children to playing RPGs. So it's got a very easygoing and lighthearted approach to the game. It's very much based on cooperation and learning how to do your skill checks and stuff, which I think is awesome. So I've been thinking this morning prior to this stream starting about the name of the inn that I'm going to be, one of the illustrations I'm doing, is the Salmon Spyglass, and how I want to create the sign for that. So I was researching salmon, of all things, and I didn't realize there was such a physiological change in male salmon, particularly sockeye salmon, between when they're in the ocean and when they're going into the rivers to spawn. The bodies just change so dramatically. The jaws reshape and everything, and they kind of go from looking like fish to looking like sea creatures that I wouldn't want to encounter, especially the jaws. They're just kind of scary. So I think that I'm going to have to be mindful that this module is going to children when I design the sign. You could do a couple different versions of that to very different effect, depending on what type of salmon you chose to illustrate with that. But yeah, that'll be fun. It's nice to be able to do art for games that are introducing people to the community. And kind of particularly lovely to be able to do stuff that's lighthearted. There's a lot of gaming art that is absolutely incredible, but it's not particularly lighthearted because so much of what goes on in most role playing contexts is a survival struggle, right? It's part of what makes things epic. It's part of what helps people feel like heroes, is that sense of overcoming these impossible odds or just these situations that we don't typically live out in the day to day. And you can create some incredible art out of that, and people do. But it's not my forte. And I just think it's fun to be able to balance it out with some other kinds too once in a while. So there we go. That's starting to look pretty good. Let's see. Rocks, maybe? Yeah, maybe let's do some rocks. Top down is new to me. A lot of the art, especially for maps that I do, is very isometric, kind of that perspective, high off into the distance kind of thing. So I chose to do this map in part because it would be a challenge for me to see what I could do to learn and figure out if this was a style that I enjoyed. Myrna just sent me a message saying that you said, "What woo, Laura? Are you talking about the game design?" It is pretty awesome. I think what was really cool for me is that as far as I know, this person found me on Twitter, which is a place that I'm slightly terrified of. I'm trying to teach myself to become more active there. It just feels like it moves so fast that I don't often know what to do with it all. So it was like, okay, cool. Like this is a medium that I can try and interact with, and it won't be completely vexing, I guess. I strongly prefer Instagram. There's just something about the way that it moves and just the way that you can filter it that I really like. I like that I'm basically following just artists on Instagram, and it is such a great way for me to start my day. I grab my coffee, I go online, I check it out, and see what other people are up to. And I don't know if it works that way for everybody else, but seeing all these other people being creative in the world really kind of gets me fired up to go and do what I want to do and what I can do. And that's just pretty awesome. So I think we need some shadows for these trees. Which way is our light coming? The light is coming from here. All right, so I'm just suggesting the shadows with the lines right now. They're going to be most likely more effectively represented with the color, because you can do a lot with shading that you can't necessarily do with a ton of texture when you're trying to indicate translucency. Like a shadow isn't a solid object, so my usual method of cross-hatching until everything is dark doesn't necessarily apply in a shadows situation. There are ways to do it. I just don't know that they're necessarily appropriate when you're trying to do an RPG map as compared to perhaps a portrait. So there we go. That's starting to look really good. I'll do this one over here. So one of the things that I love about palms is that you can start going in and adding all of your shadows to make them look far more dimensional. And this part is time consuming, but the results are just spectacular. Might need a smaller pen though. So you can see how adding different densities of the hatching is giving this a lot more dimension. Like you can tell that the ends that are lighter are more in the sun, and the parts that are darker are closer to the tree. And I think it's a great way to take something from as simple and almost cartoony as what this looks like into something that gives you a lot more of an evocation of actual foliage. And it's just lines. It's teeny tiny little hatches. And I think that's part of one of my favorite things about doing things like cross hatching and pointillism, which I do a lot of, is just that the movements are simple. There's nothing difficult about them. Anybody can do them. And from there, it's just a matter of learning how to build them up to get the effect that you want. I think that that makes it really accessible. And I'm all for anything that gets more people drawing. Sorry, just stretching. So where these two trees are touching, I want to make it very clear that this one is the one whose leaves are on top. So I'm doing the same thing that I did on the body over here and just making sure that these leaves that are coming in underneath are darker than the leaves that are on top here, which will give that impression for me. And then once we start coloring these as well, it'll push the contrast even farther. You don't want to black everything in when you're doing this kind of work if you're planning on going to color, because it kind of robs your color's chance to appear darker. And you can do a lot with that, especially if you're doing something like watercolor washes or Copic marker, just with the hatching. Like what would take me a couple different markers to achieve if I was just applying straight color, I can do with one or sometimes two if there's a lot of solid ink going on underneath it, just because the chroma of the color looks different with the density of the ink. And I find that that kind of sometimes helps me balance my workload a little bit. Is this is the part of it that I love. Like the inking and the spending time with the pen is where I get really excited about what I'm doing. And the longer that I can do what I like, the happier I tend to be with a piece, and then usually the more satisfying the piece is when it's done. I'm a firm believer that the happier you are when you make something, the better it turns out in the end. So the longer that I can kind of spend here doing the part that I love, then it makes the coloring go faster, and also just keeps the balance of things more where I want it to be, which is really nice. I think anytime that you're making something, it's important to remember that you should enjoy the process. Like if you're not enjoying the process, then it might be worth evaluating why that is and what you can do to make it more enjoyable for you. Because doing stuff that isn't fun is, although sometimes very necessary, there's no reason to not try to have a good time whenever we have the chance to do that. Especially if art is a passion or a hobby of yours, right? It shouldn't feel like a slog. I'm not going to say that it doesn't sometimes. When you're 40 hours into a piece and you're tired of looking at it and it still needs to get done. Yeah, that's a slog. For sure. And see, I over-darkened that there. We can't kind of tell which side is higher. I'll have to be able to manage that with the markers when we go in to color it. Because that's an area where using a much, much brighter marker will make sure that that layer looks proper. And I'm saying marker simply because the paper that I'm working on right now is a heavy Bristol vellum, which is a much better ground for marker work than watercolor work. I do watercolor as well, but that's a bit more of a conscious decision because it changes the paper that I'm using and the steps that I go through to make sure that that's all organized and ready to go. So typically when I'm kind of just wanting to draw and have a lot of fun with it, I stick with ink and then marker, which is I guess another form of ink, because I find those are the ones I'm the most fluent in, and it just makes the process a lot easier, a lot less something that I have to think hard about, which gives me a better chance of getting into a flow state. If you've never read about flow states are fascinating, and they're one of the reasons that I draw, just to have the experience of doing it. I have a couple of drawings that I'm quite particular about. I'm really fond of them. That happen during flow states where I don't even remember most of drawing them. Just that feeling of kind of, I don't know how to describe it, being at one with the universe. Sounds cheesy, but it's totally true. I've heard different people talk about it in different ways. Like, I have a couple of friends who run that talk about it. I have another friend who weightlifts who said that, like, on a perfect set, it goes. You don't have to think about it. It's not work. It just happens. And that's a really good description for me, especially for the drawing. Sometimes when it's right, it's almost like it's not me. There's just something else going on, and I'm kind of a passenger along for the ride. You can't force it though. There have been days where it'd be like, yeah, I'd really love that, and then you just never get there. If I knew how to duplicate it more reliably, I totally would. So we're just about to the hour mark. So I'm going to wrap up this tree that I'm working on, and then I think we'll call it for today. I'm going to keep working on this off screen because I do have a commitment to my patrons to get this up, so it's got to be up before I take off for the weekend. I'm really looking forward to my long weekend plans. This is a gathering that friends of mine host every long weekend in September, where we go and take over a camp and play board games for the entire weekend. It is fantastic, and I'm really, really looking forward to going. It's just really awesome to have a community of people that are interested in the same things that you are. And it's also really nice how, like, I have complex feelings about the ascendancy of nerd culture. I guess that's a rant for a different day and possibly not at all. But it's nice that things that I love, like board games and role playing games and all of that, is becoming more accessible to the general public. Like Matt Groening's new show, Disenchanted, If you haven't seen it and you have access to Netflix, I totally recommend it. I really love it. It's a great lampooning of the whole fairy tale culture. It's funny, I find. I really love all the signs in the city. I think that's one of my favorite things is reading the signs whenever they're going through town. And I don't think that that show could have been made with the kind of success that it's reaching even 10 years ago, because the cultural milieu in terms of nerds and fantasy and all of that stuff was so different. And I find that encouraging. I really do. I think it dovetails in interesting ways with what's going on with print media right now and getting your work out there in formats that are not digital. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with digital. Don't hear me saying that because that's not what I'm saying. But the idea of a book and that experience that reading a book takes you on is like role playing, and I like that more people are starting to see gaming and time shared in those kinds of community ways as valuable, or at least that's the perception that I'm getting from the way the media is starting to represent it now. It probably always was valuable, just possibly to a smaller audience. So I'm not sure where I was going with that whole point. I do that sometimes, get on tangents and then forget what it was I was trying to say. But yeah, if you haven't seen Disenchanted, I recommend it. If you haven't seen Gallivant, which I believe is also on Netflix now, and you like musicals, that's also one that I really enjoy. The episodes are short, so even if you're not super crazy about musicals, it's worth checking out a couple. My favorite is there's an episode that Weird Al Yankovic guest stars in, which was a cameo I was not expecting in the slightest, and it was quite delightful. So yeah, that's a good one. I don't watch a lot of TV. It's not something that I give a lot of my time to. So I'm probably out of the loop on a great many things that are fantastic and worth watching. If you've got recommendations, leave them below, and I'll do what I can to check them out. But really, if you want to recommend me a book or two, that's going to be more my speed. I just finished Jim Butcher's new book for the Dresden Files called Briefcases, which was a collection of short stories, which was pretty fantastic. I enjoyed that. Writing short stories is hard. I have a much easier time with long length fiction and, longer length nonfiction from my thesis. Short stories, you gotta be able to do so much in such a tiny space. And I have a lot of admiration for people who manage it, because that's a tall order. So last night I started the first book of the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children trilogy. So we'll see how that goes. And then after that, I have An Unkindness of Magicians on my table waiting for me to pick it up. So yeah, this is what we got accomplished today. I will do my best to get this finished up on time for my other people. And I will see you guys next Thursday. Take it easy.